And good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Before I get going, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we met this morning, the Wiradjuri people. I'd like to pay both mine and our respects to elders past, present, and of course emerging. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the immense and incredibly important work being completed by our First Nations colleagues across all of our respective jurisdictions on a day-to-day basis. So having spent the morning discussing how important that front of house framework is, I'm going to take us in the opposite direction, if I can, really quickly into the deep end in terms of individual type work. Julian and Lisa and Malcolm are well aware that I think that the work that they complete is infinitely more important than the work that I complete at the other end of the spectrum. I think this is where our resource allocation should be. But every now and then people slip through the net, and that's not a criticism of our frameworks. I think it's just a reality of how complex and dynamic extremism has become in a modern world. And every now and then that involves young people. And I guess those trends are moving in the wrong direction really quickly, if I can be honest. Talk lots about youth engaging in extremism, lots about where risks and needs assessment tools kind of fit into that discussion over the last 12 to 18 months. But today's a chance to touch very quickly on the notion of case management. And for us as an agency, it actually started with minors charged and convicted for terrorism offences. I'd be lying if I said we had a beautiful framework in place. I'd be lying if I said we had any idea what we were doing when we kicked off that process. The literature was sketchy. There wasn't a lot of youth-specific programs for us to lean on, and off we went, I guess, on a bit of a journey with a small cohort of Islamic State individuals who were, for want of a better description, highly radicalised, but very workable, which is a lesson that we learnt as time went by. We have a habit in the youth space. We throw the kitchen sink at young people when they enter our systems. Psychologists, caseworkers, education, program facilitators, mentors, fitness, leisure, all of the things that the CVE literature sometimes thinks that it's created itself actually kind of already exists in some ballparks. And we learned that there's almost a pre-CVE discussion in the youth criminal justice space where young people walk into these very dynamic, very energetic, very pluralistic systems. And it actually probably lends itself really nicely to the beginning of that journey of launching a really intense counter-narrative against some of the ideas that might have brought them into our system. We learned that with this particular individual who kind of fed into a little bit of literature that suggests that juveniles convicted for terrorism might be different to juveniles engaged in general juvenile crime and delinquency. No criminogenic risks per se, substance abuse, mental health issues, not really present for the most part in our juvenile terrorism offender cohort. And I guess our key lesson was that pre-CVE assessment, pre-practice-based assessment, CVE for our agency was driving the bus, but we were taking the whole agency with us. Lots of support, lots of training, lots of opportunities to keep people grounded, really impartial and really consistent in terms of the narratives that we were using and the type of work that we were doing pre-assessment. If we can lean really quickly on Kate Burrell's model, I think there's a ton of potential with juveniles in juvenile criminal justice settings, and I don't think that's necessarily unique to New South Wales. So for this individual, we had psychs working on identity and self-esteem. We were just talking about resilience. We had caseworkers driving very deep into that space for this particular individuals. We had general pastoral care. We had intensive theological kind of work being done with those that were interested in maybe exploring their journey into theology and whether or not it might look and feel a little bit different with mainstream support. We had education, we had vocational training, we had jobs in custody. And I actually don't think that's all that impressive because it's kind of common sense for the most part. And it's kind of what we do as an agency. So I'd love to say that we discovered something immense, but really this is just kind of how we function as a criminal justice system. But what we did is sprinkle a little bit of CVE knowledge, some CVE ideas, some extremism specific considerations in and amongst the mix. And again, driving the bus, but taking the whole goddamn system with us, whether they liked it or not. We actually saw some pretty good things happen on the back of that. I think we walked away from that initial chapter of juvenile terrorism offenders, for want of a better description, feeling like we probably have a pretty fertile ballpark to do this work. Do we want young people in our system with extremism flags? Absolutely not. But if it happens, we're arguably not in the worst position given how robust our resource allocation is, how intensive the work is that we do with young people, whether it's violence, sexual offending or extremist-related offences. We're probably in a pretty good position to wrestle with this stuff across the youth ballpark. And we learnt that lesson on the back of this cohort. Developmentally informed, systemic approaches, intensive at all times, multimodal, multidisciplinary, kind of fits pretty neatly with that kind of CVE discussion that we see in the literature and that's certainly having across academia. What I really like is that there's kind of this wrestle between vulnerability and risk in the youth space. And I think we've still got a little bit of work to do around maturing how we approach that. But I think we probably don't do such a bad job of taking a really spiky, intensive kind of topic and applying a somewhat of a youth lens where vulnerability is relevant, but so too is risk all at the same time. And I think Professor Horgan spoke yesterday about this incredibly complex and dynamic ballpark that's unfolding in front of us. I think the youth topic encapsulates that without too much problem at all. I'd be lying if I said that initial chapter was smooth, though. So that case that I flicked through really, really quickly was a bit of a feel-good story for us, but they weren't all that good. So we could split the room in half and argue about concentration and dispersal in custodial settings. We could do it for the rest of the day and probably not come to a resolution. But as an agency, we're wedded to dispersal. Pluralistic, non-punitive placements are a cultural element to our youth criminal justice setting. It's United Nations conventions that buy into that to some degree. So we would do it again, knowing that it isn't perfect and there are some challenges on the back of that. That kind of pre-CVE, post-assessment double piece to the puzzle, I think, is really important because we don't tend to have young people on remand for extended periods in youth criminal justice settings, really transient, really quick environments. Some of these guys sat on remand for 2-3 years. That's really unique in our system. So the ability to come up with some kind of CVE-ish framework pre-conviction, pretty neat. We had to be patient. We had to be a little bit creative, and I still think we've got some stuff to learn on the back of that. One thing we haven't touched on, and I don't have the answer to this, but just to pose a really quick question, I guess what we saw with this cohort was this intoxicating identity of a level of power, of status, of profile that these kids probably could never achieve in their day-to-day life. So some of our kids had global notoriety, had their Facebook pages, their YouTube channels being shared around the caliphate. Foreign fighters knew who they were. An apprenticeship and a gym membership is probably not that cool. You know, it's not going to give them that intoxicating high. And it was actually a real challenge for us in our case management work, was replacing that need for power and status and identity with something that was going to be infinitely less intoxicating, obviously a lot safer. But from a developmental perspective, chasing that high was a real challenge for us, and it remained an enduring challenge moving forward with a lot of these young guys. Is it going to be the same for this smorgasbord of far-right ideas? I guess what we've seen so far, just for us in New South Wales, is probably not that global notoriety, and whilst the high is high, it probably doesn't hit that Islamic State high. I don't know if that's consistent across jurisdictions, and maybe there's a discussion point there moving forward, but just something to chew on and think about to some degree. I raced through that because whilst it started with terrorism for us, the reality is that the youth ballpark can't be characterised by discussions about terrorism. Unless I've missed something, we don't have a tidal wave of 15-year-old militants gearing up to take over the country. So we're not going to have large numbers of minors charged and convicted for terrorism offences. That's fundamentally a really good thing. And whilst we get caught up on the violent extremism, terrorism part of this conversation, that's kind of the last thing we're talking about in the youth space at the moment. And unfortunately, it's getting harder rather than easier going in that direction. The ages are getting younger. So 18 months ago, we presented some data at a conference that said 16 and a half and in custody was ballpark the profile that we'd been looking at for an extended period of time. Today, it's dipped just under the age of 14 and predominantly young people being supervised in community supervision settings. So a massive change in dynamic. The younger the ages get, the higher the vulnerability, the higher complexity, and the bigger the headaches, if I can be completely honest. It is getting increasingly difficult to do this. And whilst I sound like a crazy person, I kind of miss the terrorism offender chapter because it was just shitloads easier. That's counterintuitive. It makes absolutely no sense. I'm aware of that, but it was less convoluted. It was a little bit more black and white. And Professor Horgan again talked about ideology yesterday, used the term thorny. Never thought I'd use the term thorny in a presentation, but there we go. And I'm going to run with it, Professor Horgan, if that's completely okay. But ideology means so much to youth these days. It's no longer indoctrination to violent extremism. Ideology is a curiosity, an interest, a justification, an inspiration, a motivation. And this spectrum is getting increasingly broad and convoluted. It's getting harder to make sense of things, and it's probably getting harder to do this case management work at this point in time. So how do we see it? I think that really robust hands-on approach with terrorism offenders makes perfect sense. I think that really robust hands-on approach with individuals that have gone a long way down this pathway of extremism makes perfect sense. But I don't know that I'm comfortable having a really heavy CVE footprint with 10, 12 and 14-year-olds. That's a whole different ballpark that we're walking into at this point in time. So for us, this has become a really consultative, supportive space where our resource allocation is going more to our staff than it is to our young people. So can we take that really robust toolbox of case management work being done across the youth ballpark, maybe stay out of the limelight if possible, and capacity build the people that are already on the ground, not to be experts, not to carry risk, but can we sprinkle some ideas and some thoughts to help them intervene earlier rather than later and prevent us from having direct contact with these increasingly young cohorts? It's not a perfect science, but we're having a crack at it. So the 13-year-old that we've been consulting on recently, I'll be the first to admit our agency doesn't deal in the currency of 10, 12, 13-year-olds very, very often. We're not experts in that cohort, and we kind of hope that it stays that way. This 13-year-old was in an out-of-home care placement, horrific history of child protection kind of reporting, diagnoses for ADHD, severe conduct disorder. He'd set fires, he'd assault people. He was overtly using racial rhetoric. And he was sending makeshift explosive devices to a couple of local chicken shops and butchers because he was a vegan. In his mind, that made sense. If we wanted to plough down an academic hole, that probably meets the criteria for violent extremism if we had our textbook to some degree. I don't want to work with a 13-year-old, if I'm completely frank. So could we sprinkle some thoughts around capacity building stuff to have some conversations with him about when he was exposed to this stuff, what this stuff maybe meant to him? Could we support them to access some, environmental activists that he might be able to have some mainstream level of engagement in, where threatening the local butcher wasn't his go-to playbook? Maybe sometimes that slips through and we need to get involved, but my preference would be to resource the house down before we get anywhere near that point in time. And a case from today, 11 years old, the only 11-year-old we have in custody in New South Wales, using racial rhetoric, involved in gang activities, grievance-fueled rhetoric towards the system, query whether his victim selection around some horrific offending has been based on racial profiles and a level of kind of dehumanisation towards certain cultural groups. My initial response to that is to want to run in the opposite direction. I don't want to go anywhere near it. That is such a young profile. But again, can we support staff to have some of those difficult conversations, not to assess risk, not to provide commentary around extremism or violent extremism, but just to begin the process of exploring what is it that we're looking at here, and can we pull some of those levers in the youth space to steer this young man, young child in some ways, the hell away from this space as effectively and as efficiently as we can without actually getting our hands dirty from a CVA perspective? I guess we're about to find out, if I can be completely frank. Doesn't always work that way. I love this notion of consultation. I love this notion of resourcing our staff rather than our clients if possible. But every now and then one slips through and the system will demand that we get involved. So a case that we're just wrapping up now, a 14-year-old who kind of taps into a lot of the discussions that we're having in the literature and academia at the moment, memes, video games, game-adjacent social networking sites, young people that you would not describe as terrorism offenders, as highly indoctrinated or engaged in extremism to the nth degree, but really flying very close to the sun in a bunch of different ways. So this kid's from a rural area, known to nobody before he popped up online with a very real-looking replica firearm, firing fake bullets into the air, making threats to engage in a school shooting on a particular date. Pretty kind of confronting type narrative for a young person that nobody knew existed to that point in time. No juvenile criminal justice history, no law enforcement footprint before that moment. Horrific history of child protection reporting. Mum's a substance user, non-compliant with the psychiatric medications. Stepdad abuses mum, local drug dealer. This kid has been neglected and beaten from pillar to post throughout most of his life. It's a really sad story. He's bullied at school, understandably quite confused, quite anxious, quite withdrawn. He's playing video games online. He's got limited self-esteem, limited sense of social bonds, limited personal identity. You can see how the profile takes shape. And to that point, it's not extreme. It's not of concern to us. But the violent video games takes him into chat rooms, takes him into violent gore materials, takes him into sex abuse materials, and then takes him into exposure to extreme content that resonated with him. It fed into his grievance towards certain cultural groups that he felt bullied him at school. And the snowball gathered pace really, really quickly. His online footprint was full of white supremacist, anti-Semitic rhetoric. Again, I'm not sold he's highly engaged in violent extremism. I don't think he has a really clear conceptualisation of what's happening around him. But he set a date for an incident of targeted school violence and scared the living pants out of everyone in that part of the state. This is kind of the profile that we're dealing with now. And it makes sense when I reflect on wanting to go back to that terrorism chapter, because it was a hell of a lot cleaner than this, unfortunately. What do I like about the pro-integration model? I like that we can apply it broadly. I don't think it's just disengagement from violent extremism, but I think we can tap into these really robust interventions that maybe are a little bit more preventative and earlier in that trajectory towards violent extremism. Problem that we've got here, unlike our terrorism offenders in custody, he's interested in exploring some pro-social interests, some social relationships, but we've got a hell of a lot of work to do. He's interested in developing a sense of identity, maybe some social skills, addressing his anxiety, but we have a hell of a lot of work to do with this young man. What do? We don't have imams and sheikhs for this one in terms of ideological re-education. Who is our go-to in terms of exploring some of these unhelpful and unethical ideas that he's engaging in? He's pretty keen, but his system around him is a mess. You know, we don't have a lot of good stuff to lean on here. We don't have a lot of protective factors. We don't have a lot of strengths. And it makes me miss that terrorism chapter, because the threshold was pretty healthy and pretty insightful to some degree. This kid takes us into a journey, I guess, where we're at in the youth space at the moment, where vulnerability is becoming increasingly pronounced and risk is kind of walking alongside of that in a really awkward and very complex dynamic that I think we're all incredibly uncomfortable with. Complexities through the roof. We're starting with a lot of these increasingly young kids from a lower threshold. So while some of these intervention ideas are fantastic, it's going to take a hell of a long time to get some building blocks in place with a 14-year-old like him. Throw in the fact we're in a rural area where resource allocation is fairly limited and the dynamic is changing really, really quickly. Something we've become increasingly passionate about is the systemic needs. So we can give this kid everything, but social environment's an absolute mess. So that ecological web wrapped around him is a disaster of epic proportions. And I guess we're in the early stages, and a shout out to our friends in South Australia at the Inclusion and Support Program. Where does, elements of family and multi-systemic therapies fit into some of the work we're doing? So we can't take those frameworks and cut and paste them. We don't have the resources, but can we pick parts and formalise a bit more of a clear and consistent structure around some of these young people? Honestly, I don't know, but I think it's a deep dive that is definitely worth going on. Residual risk is another conversation that we're having a lot. This kid will be at risk, if we're honest, for a hell of a long time. His vulnerabilities aren't going to be fixed quickly. He is going to continue to exist online because he doesn't have the skill set to exist anywhere else at this point in time. So we don't have these beautiful custodial constraints where we can work on this and then talk about reintegration. This is a live thing that's happening with the vast majority of our clients. We don't have a lot of controls wrapped around them, and it is hugely challenging. And this notion of ongoing risk is increasingly dynamic, increasingly concerning in a bunch of different ways. I still think there's a ton of potential. I still think there's so much we can do. I refuse to accept that 14-year-olds aren't workable. But if we're honest, this is going to take some time, and it's going to be bloody difficult the whole way through. And it's a real game changer for us, because I would argue it hasn't been that complex before. It's just getting harder. So where do we go from here? Just to wrap this up. The trends would suggest we're trending big time in the wrong direction, and the ages will continue to get younger. It means the complexity will continue to get higher, and it means the headaches that we experience on the ground are likely to increase in the short term. I think we're going in the wrong direction, and I'm not sure there's much we can do to prevent that trajectory at this moment in time. There's implications there for policy, for practice, for research, and I think we talk broadly about youth, but we're now starting to talk about children, and that's a pretty scary place for us to be going. Today wasn't the day, but it's time for us to have some more sensitive and open conversations about the nexus between targeted school violence and the consumption and exposure to violent extremist content. It's not a new idea, but I would argue that it's an idea that hasn't been adequately unpacked anywhere. We're flying really close to the sun here, and I think we need to be brave and roll up our sleeves and dive into that conversation. And there's a couple of us in the room that are kind of already edging towards that place. Natalie's laughing at me at the moment. So we don't want to go there, but I think we have to. And if we can learn something as we do, it's probably worthwhile. Can we tweak the pro-integration model? So Mohammed, Deb and Kate, I think we've got some building blocks in place to do a bit of a deep dive in the new year around, are there opportunities for some extra levels that apply to youth around a model of that nature? And can we do this further upstream? So I don't want to work myself out of a job, but I keep saying, if we get this right in the youth space, I'm not standing here doing these conferences. Someone from the education department, somebody from child protection, somebody from funded service providers, or the guys that you guys are working with, is here providing this rhetoric around purely preventative work, early intervention, early identification work. I work from the last stop on the train line in the youth space, and whilst I love coming to these forums, the fact that I keep coming suggests we haven't quite got this right just yet. And really, I should be priced out of this discussion if we do what needs to be done in the youth space, which sounds crazy because I may be unemployed at some point in time, but that would suggest we got it right. And for the youth space, it's probably not such a bad thing. Those that know me are sick of me saying this, but I think my mantra has become more comfort with discomfort. It's going to get increasingly uncomfortable out there. I think CVE is okay with that, but I think we need to capacity build all of the youth ballpark around us to sit with how incredibly messy and confronting this is becoming. The sooner we can find our feet in that dynamic, the sooner we can continue to learn, keep wrestling with some of these challenges. And I think it's still a world of potential with youth. I think they're a cohort that's worth throwing the kitchen sink at, so to speak. But holy smokes, it's getting difficult, and there's still a fair bit to come. So thank you guys for having me this morning. I hope that posed some questions, and see where the next little bit takes us. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Steve, for an incredibly engaging and provocative and worrying presentation. Now we have another presentation from Emad Al-hammadin. Emad is a former Lieutenant Colonel from the Jordanian Royal Guard and currently doing his third year of a PhD at the University of South Australia, and also one of my former students. So it's great to have you here, Emad. Emad's going to be speaking with us about Muslim Australian youth and countering violent extremism strategy. So we're happy to have you here.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me in this conference. First of all, I'd like to introduce my research title, which is Australian Youth and Counter-Violent Extremism. And in this regards, I'm looking to find out what is the best solution or what is the best model that we can build in combination or against other models that have been in CVE for a long time. The aim of my study is I'm looking to focus on young Muslim engagement with counter-violent extremism strategy. What are the factors that affecting young people engagement? What are the factors that prevent them from engaging with counter-violent extremism strategy? And what are the factors that even enhance their engagement with CVE? In this regard, I argue that the success of counter-violent extremism strategy is largely dependent on building trust with the communities. We know in research and in all our publications that community is the cornerstone in building good strategy with the government. However, unfortunately, we are missing this opportunity, and we demonize or stigmatize the community as suspect communities because of the faults and because of the deficiency in CV, especially the first wave and the second wave that Mark has touched on them yesterday. However, building a trust with the community's organization is also the most important as well, because we need community organization, because they are most organizations that they are in contact with the young people. And when we come to the young Muslims, I'm not talking generally about young Muslims, because this is one of the wrong nations in the literature that says that young Muslim all the time, and this gives the notions that the young Muslim are always under or prone to radicalization, which is also enforced the suspect community. However, building trust, as Malcolm said before, it doesn't mean, or building a partnership with the community doesn't mean prevent extremism or prevent radicalization, because there is specific CVE, which is focused on short-run engagement, focus on short-run goals. And that maybe include the hard approach or military approach, and the other approach, which is relevant, CV relevant, which is indirectly prevent extremism and strategies. And this is also what Malcolm and Julian advocates about community resilience. Although I will go against you, Julian. Next slide. Okay, we have a problem with the CVE. We have a problem with community engagement, because until now, the evaluation of these strategies has not been effective. And even all these strategies to engage communities and to build resilience has not been proven to prevent people from drowning to radicalization or extremism. And we know that many people in Australia have been left to Iraq and Afghanistan for fighting with extremism. Does that mean that all this is not working? However, the success is limited. We can't say that this is totally failure, but the success is limited. So we are looking to find out what is the most important approach. We know in social science there is no one solution fits all, especially in CVE. So in my position, I advocate about community engagement with the community is the most important approach that we might head off. As I said, community has a unique role in partner with the organization and to build resilience with the community. And within this approach, within the bottom-up approach that we have been talking about in the literature, there are community engagement and community resilience. And this is the latest systematic review of the literature by Stevens in 2021. They said that there are two approaches, and that those are the most important approach to engage community or to build bottom-up approach against top-down approach. What's the meaning of the community engagement, and what's the meaning of community resilience, and why I advocate community engagement as the most appropriate solution? Community engagement means that citizens of any communities being able to contribute and to involve in building their own programs or their own initiatives, or to involved in decision-making process. And we found this community engagement more with municipalities, within the communities, that when there's a new project, the municipalities try to, or councils try to bring the people and to ask them what is the side effect of these projects, and to involve them in even understanding what is the side effect and what happened if we build the project and how that will affect your life. So we will ask ourselves, is this definition applies to what we are doing now? We will see. Unfortunately, the community engagement within Australia had been tasked under community policing. What's the meaning of community policing? In 1984, community policing as a concept has been introduced to the police. That means that the police officers have to go out from their daily duties, from patrolling the neighbors, and to engage with the communities, to partnership with the communities, to talk with them about things other than some policing thing. And this notion evolved to be with the CVE. In Australia, community policing has been tasked with the police. And this where is the point. Building a trust has been tasked to the police as well. And we know that communities have a problem with the police, whether it is a Muslim community or not. We always have an issue with the police. So how come you're giving the police this important task to build trust with, let's say that this is targeted community, and then to find out how to approach them through going out with them in events or in Muslim events, in Eid, in Ramadan, in these things. And I found that there is 4 or 5 only studies in Australia talking about building a trust with the communities. And all of these, unfortunately, talking about building a trust between the community and member of the police. And this is where the issue is, to confine the trust just between the police and the community. This is a big problem. And as Julian said also in resilience, the trust is most important part. However, we haven't touched on the trust. We don't know how to build the trust. What's the mechanism of build the trust? We're all talking about the importance of trust communities, but we don't know how to build a trust. Partnership with the community on the events that the police has been doing is not even sufficient to build the trust. And this is from my participant as well as a response. Community resilience, on the other hand, is aiming at the whole community. And in my perspective, this is an issue as well, because this will reinforce the suspect community as well. The second thing, that community resilience, unfortunately, you will not choose who is join the program that you have established, because you will see in my findings that young Muslim can be broadly divided into culturally Muslim and religiously Muslim. And however, how you know that you will reach to the people who are more prone to radicalization through community resilience? This in literature, we call them hard to reach. So if we make this all these fast resources to engage young people who are not either prone to radicalization, that we are wasting a lot of time and resource. So we have to find out how to reach to the people who are under maybe prone to radicalization. So I argue in this approach that community resilience is theoretically is perfect. However, when we try to apply them on the ground, it's very difficult. Because also community resilience, as we will see, will not help to build the trust. Community engagement with the Muslim community and other than police, other than law enforcement, such as DSS, is more appropriate and more sustainable trust, because there is 2 kinds of trust. There is dispositional trust, where is the trust between member of the government officers or a Muslim member. However, this is limited trust. There is also organizational trust, where the Muslim community have to trust the organization in general. So in order to find out what is the impact that affecting young people engagement, I try to categorize them under three categorizations. First of all is external factors. We can say that this is macro level. And this is the gravenesses of young Muslim from outside world. What's the external mean? This is the factors that exercise pressure on young Muslim and prevent them from engaging with the government or CVE. So this is, we know in the literature, most of them, such as the government response to terrorism. As Rita said, it's the terrorism laws, which is harshly targeting young Muslim. Foreign policy and other factors. On internal factors that I try to focus on what is between Muslim community. As a Muslim background, I know most of these things. So I try to find out from Muslim perspective what prevent them from engaging in CVE in general, because many of young Muslim in my research indicated that they will not go to CVE programs. They will not join these programs because some of them think these programs are aimed to gather information and to monitor them, to surveillance on them, to put them on the list of watch. So they will not go. So if we said that community resilience try to bring all the people together, we don't specifically know what is the concern of every young. And we will not know if that targeted of our CVE is reached to all people or not. Trust is the most important. In order to reach effective community engagement, we have to go through all these external and internal factors, and we have to try at least address most of them. I know we can't address all of them. We have to address many of them, and that will not be happen without effective community engagement. Without community, as we said in the beginning, that will tackle the gravenesses that give rise to radicalization. The government cannot do that by itself, especially when it comes to ummah and nation. What is the meaning of Muslim ummah, and how the gravenesses of religious young Muslim are more aligned with the external factor, where culturally Muslim are more aligned with the internal factors. That means those people are affected most by the events happen in Middle East, and those people, the culturally Muslim more affected by something happened domestically in Australia. The key findings of my study indicated that external and internal factors as important. However, there are disparity, and not all of them are the same important. We can't say that foreign policy or intervening in Iraq and Afghanistan now has relevance, and that was apparent in the response of my participants. Dispositional first organization trust is most important because we can build on that people trust certain people. For example, someone told me that in Queensland, one of the officers has been mentioned by 3 or 4 of my participants. They don't know that I ask different people. That means that guy has affected them and built trust with them. However, they indicated that this person has limit, and he can't go beyond his duties, and they don't trust the people who are in upper level of the government, although they trust the people who are working with them directly. Current community engagement that rely on meetings with the religious leaders and with the gatekeepers are not productive because it will not build the trust that we are looking for. It just, as they said, it's lips talk and tick boxes and just fulfill the duty of meeting with Muslim communities. And this is apparent in the research in the United States and in Australia as well. State level engagement is more productive than federal level engagement. And I agree with Julian in this, that we are working on more on the state level. Unfortunately, we have a problem within the Muslim community as well. As I said, one of the internal factors that young Muslims trust religious leaders who are born in Australia, who has an Islamic knowledge more than the people who come overseas. We know we have imams come from overseas, but mostly those people, they don't understand the context of Australia, and they don't understand the politics of Australia. In other parts, they have more knowledge sometimes in Islamic scholarship, and they can argue with the young people, as Imam Sarapazi said yesterday, because this argument or mentoring not just need a normal religious leader, need someone with a solid scholarship. Perfect. So this solid scholarship, because the narrative of religious, or the narrative of terrorism organization, I may go against Professor Horrigan and Barracosa in terms of ideology. I believe ideology is most important, and it's important when mentoring with the young people. However, ideology for juvenile and for young people is not much important, because those young people may inspire by one idea, two ideas. But when it comes to people who are doctrination, or people who are radicalized for a long time, you can't talk them without ideology. You can't talk them without the counter narrative. So I found out that there are risk factor and protective factor within my study, and we can build on that. As Grossman said in her research, that social and cultural factor as most important. But she said that in community resilience, we can take that concept and put it in community engagement. What the meaning of cultural and social resources, that mean, as Imam Sarapazi, religious leaders, those are more important. And young people who have influence in the community, we can use them to engage another hardcore young people. So this resource has not been, or underutilized, has not been used as we need. And most importantly, lack of communication in CVE. They are mentioned sometimes that they don't understand what's the meaning of CVE. That because of that, we always fear of something we don't know. So if we haven't a line of communication, we haven't a clear communication, they will not understand what the meaning of CVE, and then they will not engage in our CVE approach. So I built a model, or try to build a model, and the principle of this model I lay them on the slides, that we have to target certain people without the stigma of being targeting young people. We need to use the social cultural factors. We need to use the trusted Muslim organization. We need to use the resources that they use it every day. We know the Muslim community different because they are all around the mosques. In my area, every day we go to the mosque. In Fridays, our young people, 100, 150, they are gathering and have chat together, and they are eating pizza and these things, and we can talk to them under that things. So we have resources, but still underutilized. I have two interesting community engagement try to build upon, which is, as I said, we have to start by building a trust with them. So in order to use the right one, we have to inform them in the beginning, and then we have to tell them how to involve, and then we have to build the capacity. We have to empower the community until reach to the point that they can deal with their gravenesses without much interaction with the government. And other things that I find it very difficult, and my participants also find it very difficult, which is the funding. We have a funding issue. Any CVE funding in Muslim community could consider poisoning. And any religious leader who work clearly with the government, with CVE, they call him sellout. So in order to fix this issue, we need a funding that within the Muslim community, not outside the Muslim community, not from the government, because the funding of the government always come with obligation. And one of these obligations is to report the effectiveness of young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emad, and thank you again, Steve. Two excellent presentations. I'm sure there's plenty of questions from the audience. We have a full 10 minutes, so please raise your hand if you have a question.
Thank you. My question is probably to the first speaker, but Emad, Yeah, you might want to come to this too. So the current legal framework, policy framework seems to be around constructing threats, right? And that can have an impact when you're looking at dealing with minors and children. Do you have a sense of, because what you were describing to me sounded like harm, like kids that have experienced a harm, and you're trying to help kids that have survive and move on from that. Do you think that overall there needs to be a shift in thinking in terms of treating, looking at children through this threat lens to moving towards some sort of harm? Is that what the problem is? Or, I mean, yeah.
I think the reality is it needs to be both. And I think that is a really difficult conversation in the youth ballpark, where people are predisposed to talking about harm and vulnerability, but this is a risky topic. And I think they both need to coexist. I mean, I think the anchor is harm to the young people and harm to those around them. And I think if we can nail that front of house discussion, there has to be scope to discuss threat. We can't hide from the fact that some of these young people possess some an intention, but some vulnerabilities that could leave them open to engaging in harmful behaviour to others. So I think threat has to be part of the conversation, but it can't be the lead-off point in the youth space. I think we need to step slowly towards that threat conversation, but I think they both need to coexist, and I think that's a bit ugly, but I think that's our reality at the moment, if that answers the question. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. No? Good decision. Strong decision.
My question is for Steve. I'm just curious about how you assess the kids' capacity to engage in CVE in terms of, mental health, severe trauma, and all those stuff. So, yeah.
The beauty of the youth ballpark is, for the most part, that assessment's been done long before we come to the table. So the capacity for young people to go through legal proceedings has been assessed. Really strong mental health frameworks, I think, in schools, in criminal justice settings. So a lot of those decisions have already been made around capacities, intellectual skills, and so on and so forth. Rarely do you get to the CVE discussion without a lot of those boxes having already been ticked, if that makes sense. It's a neat place for us to be, where we're not responsible for making those decisions. So the system makes those decisions for us. And in some cases, we'll say, not this one. There are reasons, functional capacity issues, and so on and so forth. We're not going near this one as a CVE unit, but we don't have the power to make that as a unit. Our agency and the broader system in consultation with mental health does that for us. So a bit of a get out of jail free card for us in some ways, which is really nice.
Hi, I have a question to Emad. You finished your presentation with several ideas, and one of them was that funding must come from the community. I do understand this perspective up to some point, but isn't trust a two-way street? And if yes, how could you or we create an environment where the communities that you're researching trust the state or the government or the funders to accept the funding?
You mean how to accept the funding from the government while I build trust?
So basically, you mentioned that because of trust, the communities do not take the funding and cooperate in some way. So how to create this environment where they actually start cooperating?
Thank you. Yeah, I understand. Building trust, one of the big problem that we still struggle with. There is no one solution for it, because building trust has not just partnership with the community, has not just sitting with them or attending their events. You need to go beyond that, and it needs a long time to build. It's not just built by one night. And the harm of the CVE, the previous CVE, especially since 2010, and this can't be reversed in one night. And this is a trauma. I find it like a post-event trauma with many of them. They even young Muslims didn't accept to meet me, because when they said that I'm talking about CVA, they want to stay away from that. And one of the Facebook account, it's called Muslim Forum or something, and they discuss all the time CVE funding. And I sent the host, I sent them that I want to meet with some of you. And I told him about my supervisors and about all my research. However, they blocked me. And they wouldn't accept any contact with me again, because they think that any CVE is a problem. And in my approach, we will not, I believe that we have to change also the language. In order to build trust, we need to change even CVE to find another solution, because this stigma is stick with CVE for a long time. So building trust is not an issue. It's not happened between day and night. The problem with building trust now is tasked for the police and the law enforcement. And there is few studies in how to build the trust with the Muslim community without giving the mechanism of building trust.
Right, we have time for some more questions.
Yeah, I just have a question for Emad. One of the key characteristics of trust is vulnerability, both people within government and communities. I'm just thinking about your characterization of the relationship around CVEs. Is it difficult in your view that government agencies working in this space find it difficult to be vulnerable and open when working with communities, and that's one of the reasons why trust is difficult to build?
Yes, both of them, the government agents and the young Muslim and even the religious leaders who all the time working with the government on this issue, they find it very difficult to build sustainable trust. And this trust, for that, we can say that it's indirectly prevent extremism and radicalization on the long run. Yes, there is a problem from both of sides, but that I found that there is no impossible in building trust, because they open to build trust with the government, but because they think that building trust, given the law enforcement and the police were trained to gather information and to gather intelligence. And they have this concept in their mind when they interact with the police. They feel that one of them, he is a converted Muslim. He told me that police will not come to you to congratulate you for nothing. He comes for something, because his previous experience is reflected on his response with the police as well. So my idea is although it's important for the police to build the trust, but we need to move this trust to the social services are more acceptable. For example, people mention New South Wales, they are successful engagement with the government because they come from the social perspective. They are not coming from the mentality of security driven. They come from that we want to take care of you, we want to find out what the social problem within the community, not just where the extremist is.
So we've got 2 minutes to go before we break for morning tea. So I've got two very, very quick questions for our panelists before we finish. Provocative ones. Emad, very quickly, trust goes both ways. What must Muslim communities do to earn trust as well from government? And Steve, it's a very worrying landscape. What's going to happen in 3 to 4 years when some of these young people are arrested on index charges that aren't terrorism related and then get drawn into terrorism high-risk offenders legislation while incarcerated? Because it seems pretty likely to me from the sort of profile you gave.
You sure we haven't run out of time? We have legislation in the children's courts of a CVE nature, and we are wedded to not using it as an agency. So we have no appetite to engage in those conversations, if I can be frank. Our attitude is we resource the house down, give these young people every opportunity for those discussions to not be necessary when they come towards the end of their sentence. That could change if they transition into other systems, and we have no control over that. So for us, it's really just focusing on what we can control, which is as much robust and intensive case management work to walk them away from this. But we have, the Youth Ballpark has no appetite to talk about legislation, and that's not just CVE, that's a cultural component of the youth criminal justice system. So that's probably that.
Trust from the Muslim community required transparency. They need that to be authentication when you approach them, when you talk to them. They need to feel that this is coming from the pure heart, not coming from the mentality of perspective of gathering information and try to set them up.
All right. Well, thank you again for two excellent presentations and some excellent questions as well. We'll be breaking now for 20 minutes for morning tea and coming back at 10:40 for session 3, intervention assessments and management approaches. Thank you.